Welcome to our deep dive, into Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We're going to be kind of focusing in, on the whole personal effectiveness thing, and especially the idea of interdependence.
Yeah, it was so interesting because Covey's whole approach, it's not about tricks or shortcuts or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's really about a fundamental shift in how we see the world.
Yeah, he calls it a paradigm shift.
Right.
It's almost like, if you're using the wrong map to navigate, no matter how hard you try, if the map's wrong, you're going to end up lost.
Totally. And, he uses that, that optical illusion of the old woman, young lady to illustrate how our ingrained paradigms just really shape our perceptions. It's literally we need to adjust our mental maps in order to really change.
Yeah. And that illusion is such a great example because, you look at it and you can see one or the other, but it's hard to see both at the same time. And it makes you realize just how much our perceptions can actually limit our understanding.
Yeah.
So Covey contrasts what he calls the personality ethic, which is focused on those kind of surface behaviors, with the character ethic, which emphasizes those deeper principles like integrity and fairness. It's really interesting.
He shares a personal story, actually, about struggling to teach his son to share.
Yeah.
And he realized that his focus on techniques was totally clashing with his own, deeper values.
Wow.
And that's kind of when he started to see how sustainable success and happiness come from aligning with those deeper principles.
Yeah, it's kind of like realizing that real change, it comes from within, not from external quick fixes. So now Covey also talks about this thing called the PPC balance, right? And it's production versus production capability.
Right.
And he uses the analogy of the goose that lays golden eggs to kind of illustrate this.
Yeah, it's such a good one. It's so memorable because it really helps you understand that balance between, the output and the capacity to produce. Right. If you only focus on the golden eggs, the production, without, taking care of the goose, your production capability, you'll eventually have no more golden eggs.
Right.
And it's
So it's in a work setting.
Right.
If you're constantly pushing for deadlines in production, but you're not investing in your employees, in their training and their well-being, you're kind of sacrificing long-term potential for those short-term gains.
Totally. Or even in parenting.
Yeah.
You can't just tell your kids to, clean their rooms without teaching them how to be organized and responsible. You have to invest in their capability to then, get that desired production.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like a lot of Covey's ideas are about, kind of shifting our focus from those short-term solutions to, long-term sustainable growth. He also talks about the maturity continuum.
Right.
This whole moving from dependence to independence to interdependence.
Yeah. And, what's fascinating is that he argues that true effectiveness, especially in relationships and, organizations, actually requires interdependence, not just, that kind of rugged individualism that we often celebrate.
Right. And he has that great quote, interdependence is a choice only independent people can make. And I feel like that really highlights, how we need to kind of build that solid foundation of independence before we can truly thrive in those interdependent situations.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, another kind of powerful idea that Covey introduces is this beginning with the end in mind. It sounds a little morbid at first, but he suggests vividly imagining your own funeral.
Yeah.
And what you would want people to say about you, in their eulogies.
Right.
Okay.
It's a little intense.
It is a bit intense, but I see where you're going with this.
It's powerful.
It's a way to confront what truly matters in life, right?
Exactly. And that leads into the whole idea of crafting a personal mission statement. Right. And so this mission statement rooted in, principles can guide your decisions, create a foundation for a meaningful life. And it's not just about, what you want to achieve, but who you want to be.
So it's having a compass to guide you,
right?
Not just a to-do list. And so this mission statement should align with your family and your organizational goals as well.
Absolutely. He gives this example of a hotel chain where everyone, from housekeepers to executives, helped create a shared mission statement.
Yeah.
And it guided, the entire organization and gave everyone a sense of purpose.
That's a great example of how powerful a shared vision can be.
Right.
Now, Covey is probably most famous for his time management matrix, right? Which divides our time into these 4 quadrants: urgent, important, not urgent, important, urgent, not important, and not urgent, not important.
Right.
I've seen this matrix before, but I've always struggled to actually apply it. Where does Covey say we should be focusing most of our energy?
Yeah. Well, he really emphasizes quadrant 2, the not urgent, important, because these activities are often neglected.
Yeah.
But they contribute the most to your long-term goals and well-being. So things like, planning, relationship building, personal development fall into that quadrant.
Right. And it's so easy to get caught up in that urgency addiction of reacting to crises and deadlines, even when they're not truly important. It's like we're constantly putting out fires instead of building something meaningful.
Right.
It's so frustrating.
And he even shares a story about Sandra Covey skillfully saying no to a time-consuming request in order to, protect more important priorities.
Yeah.
Which is a perfect example of focusing on quadrant 2.
That's something I need to work on, being more intentional with my time and just saying no to things that don't align with my priorities.
Right.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, how does Covey approach effectiveness in relationships?
Yeah, so he uses this metaphor of the emotional bank account to describe how trust is built or damaged in relationships. So deposits, are actions that build trust, while withdrawals are actions that damage it.
So it's like, keeping a promise is a deposit and breaking a promise is a withdrawal.
Exactly.
So it's like a tangible way to actually visualize the dynamics of trust within a relationship.
Right. And other deposits include, clarifying expectations, showing integrity, and seeking first to understand before seeking to be understood.
Ah, yes. Seek first to understand. Another one of Covey's, famous principles. I'm really curious to dive deeper into that one. It sounds like a crucial part of building strong relationships.
It is.
Yes.
It is. And it ties into his concept of empathic listening, which is about truly understanding the other person's perspective and feelings, going beyond just hearing their words.
Okay.
He gives an example of, a father and a son who are struggling to communicate about, school. And the father just keeps, giving advice and judging, and it only makes things worse.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so Covey contrasts that with, empathic listening, where the father focuses on, understanding the son's feelings and rephrases, what he's saying to make sure that he truly gets it.
It sounds like it takes a lot of patience and self-control to listen empathically, especially when you're so tempted to just jump in with your own, opinions and solutions.
It does.
Yeah.
But he argues that it's so essential, for building those strong, trusting relationships.
Yeah.
And, it's about creating that space where the other person feels heard and understood, which is, like the foundation for any healthy relationship.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've explored paradigms, principles, the PPC balance, the time management matrix, the emotional bank account, even touched on empathic listening a little bit.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It is.
And it's amazing how much it's all interconnected.
It is all interconnected.
Yeah.
I mean, these concepts all build on each other to create a framework for personal effectiveness.
Yeah.
And in the next part, we'll delve into the remaining habits and kind of see how they contribute to building, truly effective and interdependent relationships.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm looking forward to that. This has already given me so much to think about. It seems like Covey's work offers a roadmap for, not just achieving success, but like actually living a more meaningful and fulfilling life. We left off talking about how important it is to seek first to understand before being understood.
Right.
And it seems like such a, major key to Covey's whole approach to effective relationships.
Yeah, it's really like the foundation for everything else.
Yeah.
Without understanding, you're just kind of talking past each other.
Right. And Covey frames this within the concept of, think win-win, his habit 4.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds simple enough, but I imagine it's a lot more challenging than it seems,
It definitely is.
Yeah.
It requires a real shift in thinking.
Mm.
Most of us are kind of conditioned to see things as either, I win, you lose.
Yeah.
But win-win is about finding solutions where everyone benefits.
Right. And I've always been kind of a competitive person, so this whole idea of abundance, like there's enough for everyone to succeed, that's a little bit mind-bending for me.
It is. It's like a fundamental paradigm shift. Think about it this way. When you see someone else's success as a threat, it actually limits your own potential. But when you see it as proof that success is possible for everyone, it's inspiring.
Mm. That's a really good point. It kind of changes the whole dynamic. Right. Instead of competing, you start collaborating.
Exactly. And Covey lays out, 5 key dimensions to creating these win-win situations. And it's character relationships, agreements, supportive systems, and processes.
Okay, so let's break those down a little bit. What does he mean by character?
Well, he's talking about, integrity, maturity, and that abundance mentality that we were just discussing.
Yeah.
You can't really create win-win solutions if you're not operating from a place of, honesty and trust.
Yeah, so it's not just about being nice or agreeable. It's about having like a strong moral compass.
Exactly. And then there are the relationships, and those, they need to be built on open communication and like a genuine desire to understand each other's needs.
Okay. And this is where that empathic listening that we talked about earlier really comes in.
Totally. You can't find solutions that work for everyone if you're not really listening to what they're saying and trying to see things from their perspective.
Right. Okay. So what about agreements?
Well, agreements are all about clarity and mutual benefit. So everyone involved needs to understand what's expected of them and feel like they're getting a fair deal, you know?
Yeah, I can see how, like, vague agreements or unspoken expectations could lead to a lot of, misunderstandings and conflict.
Oh, totally. Definitely Covey emphasizes that agreements should be specific, measurable, and achievable.
Okay.
No one should feel like they're being taken advantage of or left out.
Gotcha. And then there's supportive systems. What does he mean by that?
He's talking about the environment in which these win-win interactions are happening.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a family, a workplace, or a community, the system needs to reward cooperation and not punish people for trying to, do the right thing.
Right. So it's like creating a culture where win-win thinking is actually valued and supported.
Exactly. You can't expect people to act in a win-win way if the system is set up to, reward competition and individual achievement.
Yeah, that makes sense. And finally, there's processes.
Right. So processes are about having a structured approach to finding solutions.
Okay.
It's about working together to identify everyone's needs and then brainstorming creative ways to meet those needs.
He gives that example of that company that's trying to implement a new training program for managers.
Oh.
And at first, there's a lot of resistance, but they eventually, create a process that results in a win-win for everyone involved.
Exactly. It wasn't about, one side winning and the other side losing.
Right.
It was about finding a solution that benefited both the company and the trainees.
I'm starting to see how win-win is less about, negotiation tactics and more about just like a fundamental way of approaching relationships and problem solving.
It is. It's about seeing the world through, a lens of abundance and possibility, believing that there's a way for everyone to succeed.
And it all kind of ties back to that idea of seeking first to understand.
Right.
It does. You can't create those win-win solutions if you're not truly listening to and understanding the needs of others.
Exactly. Which brings us to Covey's habit 5.
Mm-hmm.
Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Yeah.
We've touched on this a little bit before, but I'm kind of curious to delve a little deeper into the nuances of this principle.
Sure.
What are some of the common mistakes that you see people making when it comes to listening?
Well, Covey points out that, most of us listen with the intent to reply, not to understand.
Yeah.
Like we're so busy formulating our own response in our heads that we don't really hear what the other person is saying.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that. Sometimes it's like we're so focused on getting our own point across that we miss the opportunity to really connect with the other person.
Absolutely. And, when we do that, we miss out on valuable information and insights. We also create barriers to communication because the other person feels like they're not being heard.
Right. So how do we break this habit and become more effective listeners?
Well, Covey recommends practicing empathic listening.
Okay.
It's about putting aside your own agenda and truly trying to see the world from the other person's perspective.
Earlier, you mentioned that there are 4 stages of empathic listening.
Yes.
Can you remind me what those are again?
Of course. So the first stage is mimicking, simply repeating back what the other person said.
Okay.
And it shows, that you're paying attention and you're trying to understand their words.
So it's like acknowledging their words without adding your own interpretation or judgment.
Right. And the second stage is rephrasing, putting what they said into your own words to make sure that you're understanding them correctly.
Okay.
So you might say something like, it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated with the situation, to make sure that you're accurately capturing their feelings.
Okay. Gotcha.
The third stage is reflecting, feeling, verbalizing the emotions that you sense the other person is experiencing. So you might say, you seem frustrated, or I can hear the disappointment in your voice.
So it's about going beyond just the content of their words and really tuning into the emotions beneath the surface.
Exactly. And then the fourth stage kind of combines all three. You rephrase the content and you reflect the feeling.
Okay.
And this demonstrates like a really deep level of understanding and helps the other person feel truly heard.
It sounds like it takes a lot of effort and self-awareness to really reach that fourth stage of empathic listening.
It does, but it's a skill that can be developed with practice. And, the rewards are immeasurable. When people feel truly understood, it builds trust, It strengthens relationships, and it opens the door to much more effective communication.
Makes sense. But what about when you need to, express your own thoughts and feelings? Doesn't seeking first to understand sometimes make it harder to get your own point across?
Well, Covey would actually argue the opposite.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He believes that once you've truly understood the other person's perspective, you're actually in a much stronger position to communicate your own ideas effectively.
So by listening first, you're actually increasing your chances of being heard.
Exactly. And it goes back to those Greek terms that we talked about earlier: ethos, pathos, and logos.
Right. Ethos is your credibility. Pathos is your ability to connect emotionally. And logos is the logic of your argument.
Exactly. And so by seeking first to understand, you're building ethos and pathos. People are more likely to trust you and be open to your message if they feel like you genuinely understand them.
It's like building a bridge of understanding before you try and deliver your message.
It is. It is. And he gives a couple of really great examples of this. He talks about a manager who was struggling to communicate effectively with his boss.
Oh, okay.
The boss had a very different communication style, and the manager just kept hitting a wall.
So the manager needed to kind of adjust his approach to better connect with his boss.
Exactly. He eventually realized that he needed to understand his boss's communication style and tailor his presentations accordingly. And once he did that, their communication improved dramatically.
Okay. And Covey also mentions a university professor who put in extra effort to make his presentations more engaging for his students, even though it required him to step outside of his comfort zone.
Yes. And it's a great example of how seeking first to understand can improve communication in any setting. Whether you're dealing with, your boss, your students, your spouse, or your kids, taking the time to truly understand their perspective will make you a much more effective communicator.
So habits 4 and 5 are really about shifting from like a transactional approach to communication to a more transformative one.
Yeah.
It's about moving beyond just simply exchanging information and really striving to create genuine connection and understanding.
Exactly. And when you can do that, it opens up a whole world of possibilities.
Right.
It allows you to tap into the power of synergy, which is Covey's Habit 6.
We touched on synergy briefly earlier.
Yeah.
Can you kind of remind me what it's all about and how it fits into this whole framework of interdependence?
Sure. So synergy is the principle that, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
It's about creating something new and better together than any one person could do alone.
And you mentioned that example of the college class that transformed into a synergistic co-creative experience.
Right.
Going from that traditional lecture format to a much more, interactive and engaging learning environment.
Right. And that's such a great illustration of what synergy can look like.
Yeah.
It's about tapping into the collective wisdom and creativity of a group of people to generate solutions that are truly, innovative and effective.
So it's about more than just cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
It's about like a kind of creative alchemy that happens when people come together with a shared purpose and a willingness to listen to and learn from each other.
Exactly. And Covey emphasizes that synergy is not about compromise. It's not about finding the middle ground or watering down everyone's ideas. It's about embracing those differences, challenging assumptions, and pushing each other to think bigger and bolder.
So it requires a high level of trust and respect.
Right. Absolutely. Synergy can only happen in an environment where people feel safe to express their ideas, even if they're different or unconventional.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels valued and heard, regardless of their position or perspective.
Exactly. And Covey argues that this kind of environment is essential for achieving true greatness. When people feel safe to challenge each other and build on each other's ideas, amazing things can happen.
He gives a couple of other great examples of synergy in action. There's that business team that comes up with a breakthrough solution to a complex problem. And then there's the couple who uses synergy to resolve a conflict over their vacation plans.
Right. And in both cases, they kind of go beyond compromise.
Right.
And they find a solution that neither of them could have come up with on their own. It's a perfect illustration of how synergy can lead to outcomes that are far greater than the sum of the individual contributions.
So we've moved from dependence to independence to interdependence, and now we're talking about synergy, this incredible force multiplier that can help us achieve extraordinary things together.
Exactly. And it all starts with that foundation, of seeking first to understand, creating those win-win solutions, and building strong relationships based on trust and mutual respect.
This is all so fascinating. It's making me rethink my whole approach to communication and relationships. But before we wrap up, I want to hear more about Covey's Habit 7, Sharpen the Saw.
Yeah.
We talked about it briefly, but I'm curious to explore the specific practices that he recommends for each dimension of renewal.
That's a great place to pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Habit 7 is all about taking care of our most valuable asset, ourselves.
Right.
And it's the foundation for everything else, and it's essential for sustaining all the other habits in the long run.
Okay, I'm looking forward to diving into that. This has already given me so much to think about. It seems like Covey's work offers a roadmap for, not just achieving success, but for actually like living a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Okay, so we're back for this final part of our deep dive, into Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we've covered so much ground, from paradigms and principles to like the power of synergy and, empathic listening. It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. And, we finally arrived at that final habit, habit 7, sharpen the saw.
Yeah.
And it's all about renewal, about taking care of, our most valuable asset. Ourselves.
Right. And, you mentioned earlier that Covey breaks this down, into these 4 key dimensions, physical, spiritual, mental, and, social, emotional. But what I find really intriguing is that he actually sees this as the foundation for all the other habits.
Yeah. It makes sense when you think about it. You can't be truly effective in any area of your life if you're running on empty.
Yeah, totally. So let's kind of dive into each dimension a little bit, What are some of the specific practices that Covey recommends for, like, physical renewal?
Well, the basics are really key here. Exercise, a healthy diet, getting enough sleep, and managing stress. It's about giving your body what it needs to thrive.
Yeah, it seems pretty simple, but I think, a lot of us struggle with consistency in these areas.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a challenge in our, busy modern world. But Covey emphasizes that even small, consistent efforts can make a big difference over time.
Yeah, it's like that saying, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit.
Right.
And it seems like that applies to all the 7 habits, not just sharpen the saw.
It does. It really does. Now, for spiritual renewal, Covey encourages us to connect with something larger than ourselves, something that gives our lives meaning and purpose.
And this could look different for everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For some, it might be, religious practice or spending time in nature. For others, it might be through art, music, meditation, or service to others. The key is to find what resonates with you and what makes you feel connected to something beyond your everyday concerns.
Right. And Covey shares that, powerful story about Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps.
Right.
And even in those horrific circumstances, Frankl found that he still had the freedom to choose his response.
That's right. And, he attributed that ability to his spiritual strength. And Covey argues that our sense of meaning and purpose is what allows us, to make choices that are aligned with our values, even in the face of adversity.
So it's about cultivating that kind of inner strength that helps us navigate, the inevitable challenges of life.
It is. Now, when it comes to mental renewal, Covey, he's a strong advocate for lifelong learning. He encourages us to broadly engage in stimulating conversations and explore, new ideas and ways of thinking.
I love that. It's about, staying curious and just keeping our minds sharp.
Exactly. And he also encourages us to use both our left brain and our right brain.
Okay.
To tap into both our logical, analytical side and our creative, intuitive side.
Makes sense.
So he suggests things like visualization techniques to kind of engage that right brain and to like re-script our limiting beliefs.
Yeah. Okay. So it's about using the power of our imagination to create like a new vision for ourselves and our lives.
Exactly. And then finally, there's social emotional renewal. And this is about nurturing our relationships with others, contributing to something larger than ourselves, and finding ways to give back.
It's about those emotional bank accounts we talked about.
Exactly.
Making deposits in the relationships that matter most.
Right. Covey emphasizes the importance of empathy, kindness, and service in our interactions. He encourages us to seek to understand others' needs and to find ways to give back to our communities.
He also talks about that idea of scripting others, which is about reflecting back to them a positive and empowering image of themselves.
Right. It's about helping them see their own potential and encouraging their growth and development.
Yeah. So it's about creating like a ripple effect of positivity in the world, one interaction at a time.
Exactly.
So, we've come full circle. We've explored all 7 habits, and it's clear to me that they're not just about like individual effectiveness. They're about building a better world. Right. One interaction, one relationship at a time.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
Covey's work is ultimately about living a life of integrity, purpose, and, deep connection with others.
This has been an incredibly insightful journey. I feel like I have a whole new framework, for approaching life and work.
I'm so glad to hear that. And, I hope that you'll continue to explore these ideas and see how they can make a difference in your own life.
I definitely will. And for our listeners out there, we would love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you the most from our deep dive into the 7 habits? What are some ways that you can incorporate these principles into your own life? And until next time, keep diving deep